It's week 13, it's Thursday night, and there's over $1 million up for grabs. There's a lot of interesting plays on this slate, and you're going to want to play them, especially these three dudes. And we'll start with Derek Carr. These three dudes are kind of the first look standouts for me. Derek Carr at $10,200. Look at his price point. Nobody is within $2,000 of him either way. It's a very unique price point, the most unique that I have in my database for the season. Now look, Derek Carr has been real life not that great. 31st in accuracy, 29th in true completion percentage, one of the least efficient quarterbacks in the NFL, and I mean that's why the Raiders, partially why they're playing the way they are this season. But this is fantasy. This is DFS, maybe even betting. We don't care about what you're doing in real life. He is top 5 in deep attempts. He's borderline top 10 in red zone attempts. So he has these high upside plays in this offense and what he's doing. And because of that, he's posted 18 or more fantasy points in 4 of his last 5 games. And 18 points is basically what he needs to get to in this matchup right here for us to pay it off at around $10,000. And it helps that he's facing a banged up secondary that's bottom 10 in the NFL, and a nice team total of 25 points indicates success near 20 fantasy points for us. So Carr is the expensive guy who first stood out to me, but then if you go down here, there's a couple of values, and we'll start with $2,400 Brandon Powell from the Rams. Now Powell last week for the Rams saw 26 snaps. That's pretty damn good. The second most he's seen this year at 41% of the snaps. He basically rotated in with Tutu Atwell as the wide receiver 3. And Powell for this team has mainly been a special teams guy, special teams captain in some instances, but he rotates in sometimes and sees some schemed plays for him. And he even saw scheme plays this past week. He actually had over 12 fantasy points. He had 3 carries, 4 receptions on 4 targets. This is really good usage. I mean, the dude went over 80 total yards. Yeah, you're not going to get 45 rushing yards out of a wide receiver every week, but they are designing plays for him. He's below $3,000. He's seeing 40% snaps in back-to-back games, 2 or more targets in 3 straight games. He's a solid play. But he's not the only solid value wide receiver. Look at this. At just $200 flat, we see Keelan Cole from the Raiders. And Cole is the clear wide receiver 3 on this team. This past week, he played 35 snaps. That ended up being 57% of the total snaps. He ran 22 routes, 20 plus routes for a $200 player. Oh my goodness. So that's the good news. But the bad news is he's behind clearly Devontae Adams, Josh Jacobs in terms of the priority of the plays in this offense, and even Mac Hollins. And because of that, he has just 6 receptions on the season. He has 6 targets over his last 5 games alone, but hey, I'll take just 1 or 2 targets at $200 and hope that it goes for a big play or a touchdown. He's out there enough to definitely be in play at this price tag. So those are some players for this DFS slate who stood out right away. Maybe even consider some of them like Brandon Powell in your deeper leagues in season long. But I must admit that the rest of the Rams wide receivers are difficult to parse through, and let's discuss. We can start with their wide receiver 1 right now, since Allen Robinson and Cooper Kupp are going to be out for this game, and that's Van Jefferson at $6,400. Jefferson played all 64 snaps in week 13. He's the wide receiver 1. He has elite speed, solid size, and this led to 4 targets on Sunday. And now in games without Kupp, he's averaging 5.3 targets, but it doesn't help that it's from Bryson Perkins and John Wolford at quarterback. If we look at his fantasy points here, when he came back, he was limited. He wasn't putting up any points, but then when he started to finally get his role, about 12 points, 7, about 12, and 6 points. Honestly, when you're averaging like 9 fantasy points per game with John Wolford and Bryson Hopkins for a showdown slate, it's not terrible. But he's also the most expensive Rams wide receiver, so why not just go elsewhere, and maybe that's what we'll do. For example, you get Ben Skowronek, who's $4,800, significantly cheaper than Van Jefferson here, and the clear wide receiver 2 in this offense. Now, Skowronek ended up playing all but 2 snaps last week, 97% of the snaps, a very solid role, 30 routes led to 3 targets. But he's not the greatest of athletes. I mean, his speed at 4.62, not that great. He's not the Cooper Kupp type route runner to make up for that lack of speed, but he makes up for that lack of speed with size that helps in the red zone. Sean McVay likes that, especially without Allen Robinson and Cooper Kupp out there. And just being on the field a lot has led to targets. Here you're seeing the targets in this column his last 4 games, 7, 4, 4, and 3. So for a cheaper price tag, if you're going to see 4 or 5 targets just like Van Jefferson, yeah, they might not be as downfield, but they might be in the red zone. I'll just take that. There's one more wide receiver on this team who I think might be the most interesting for his skill set and ability to see more usage. And that's the second-year player, Tutu Atwell, who's just $4,400, the former second-round pick from last year who ended up getting injured. He's battled injury a lot of his career, but now he's back. And he finally saw some usage last week, playing a career-high 30 snaps, and this led to a solid 5 targets. He had 2 catches, 48 yards. He's going to have some big play upside because of his elite speed, and then he also had 4 carries for 23 yards, so sort of used all over the field in this scheme. Now, his problem when he was coming out of college is just his size. He's 5'9" and only 155 pounds. Not many dudes like this have success, if any, really. Devonta Smith, but he's probably in the mid-160s, maybe even 170 now. 155 is hard to have consistent success, but we don't need consistency. We just need one game and really one play from you at this price tag. I actually think Atwell is a fair price. He's around the kicker's price tag when he has clear and obvious upside from his deep ball ability. So we talked about some values. We talked about some of the mid-range options. Let's go back up top now to the studs on this slate. They happen to all be from the Raiders. And let's talk about Josh Jacobs, who I've projected in the DFS blueprint for 1.7 more points than Davante Adams for a cheaper price tag. He's going to have a more difficult matchup, but like we mentioned earlier, this Rams defense and their defensive line is banged up, and he's going to be a 6-point favorite in this one, which helps running backs. Jacobs now, over his last 4 games, he has 26 rush attempts per game and over 4 receptions per game. So he's averaging over 30 touches per game and 28 fantasy points per game. Yeah, he's basically been the best running back in football during that time. He also has 2 or more receptions in every single game since week 2, which gives him a little bit of security there. I prefer him over Davante Adams in this matchup. I also have him projected for over 100 rushing yards in this game, but his player prop is only set at 87.5. And now this is on prizepicks.com. You'll get a free bet up to $100 with the link in the description below, and use the code SAL22, SAL22. You can get that and pair it with a bet that is literally free money you cannot lose. We'll talk about that momentarily. But first, we have to talk about Davante Adams, the most expensive player on this slate, as he should be, because he's somehow going to put up 1,700 yards this year, and nobody is even paying attention, it seems. Adams, over his last 5 games, is averaging over 13 targets per game and 30.3 fantasy points per game. Everybody loves Josh Jacobs. I love Josh Jacobs. Adams has been playing better over the last month of the season, which is pretty hard to do. And sure, he'll see some Jalen Ramsey in this matchup, who's just been fine this year, has been burnt by even rookies this season. So I'm not concerned for Davante Adams, who is literally a walking cheat code, and let me explain. The cheat code targets in fantasy that we have discussed are the deep targets and the red zone targets. He's top 5 in both categories and actually leads every single wide receiver with 41 cheat code targets this season. Oh yeah, we like that. Now, he's the 3rd best value, if you will, bang for your buck, according to the DFS blueprint, of these expensive guys, Carr, Jacobs, and him. But out of every player above $3,000, he's also the 3rd best value. That's how good these top 3 plays are today, and maybe you can get to all 3 of them. Maybe that's the way to go. So we've talked about some values on the bottom. We've now hit on all the dudes up top. Let's talk about a very difficult upper mid-range. And it starts with a Rams running back in Cam Akers, who, look, he's $7,800, and for his overall season usage, that's way too much. But if we get what we got from him last week in his usage, it's not that bad. That's some wild English, by the way. Get what we got. Because what we got last week from Akers was 46 of 64 total snaps. That is 71% of the snaps, season high, and a season high 18 touches. But the problem is, can we rely on this? Because just a week previous, it was Kyren Williams, the rookie, seeing over 70% of the snaps and most of the touches. Because what you're seeing right here, this darker blue is Kyren Williams, the lighter blue is Cam Akers. So 8 out of the 9 3rd and longs, it was Kyren Williams, the passing down back on the field. In the 2-minute offense, it was Kyren Williams, the passing down back on the field. Now, Akers was the running back to see the goal line work, but for a team with a 19-point team total, trailing by 6 according to Vegas in this one, it might be the passing down back in Williams, who's cheaper, on the field more. So Cam Akers at 7,800, I just think is fine. I think he's overpriced. Kyren Williams, I also think, is overpriced, but between the two of them, for over $2,000 less, Kyren Williams might catch 4 or 5 balls in this game. And another dude who can catch 4 or 5 balls in this game is Matt Collins, who's 7,400, actually cheaper than Cam Akers. Now, Collins is a pretty unique player, and he fits his role on the outside for the Raiders here really well. Basically, he sees a lot of usage if Adams is being double covered, which has happened often this year with his safety over top, but he's great. He has great speed. He has great size at 221 pounds. My DFS blueprint currently has him coming in low owned, even though he's always on the field. He's played 100% of the snaps in 4 straight games. And he very quietly is top 20 in the NFL in deep targets, because Derek Carr is throwing deep often this year. So he has big play upside. He's not insanely overpriced, and he has a good role always on the field. At this price point, he basically needs 12 points to pay it off. He's done that in 4 of his previous 7 games. The issue is he probably has to do it early, because it's probably going to be a run script for Josh Jacobs in the second half if the Raiders actually get out ahead here, and that's the concern with Adams soaking up a lot of the target share. And now, earlier I mentioned that free bet, and I wasn't kidding. Justin Herbert here. Pair up any of your Thursday night bets with Justin Herbert for Sunday over a half a passing yard. If he throws for 1 passing yard, you win. This is a promotional prop that won't last long on prizepicks.com, so click the link in the description to get it. If you want a free bet up to $100, use the code SAL22 on your first sign up, and then you can use it on this bet, and you basically guarantee yourself some winnings, which is a fantastic thing. So to get the free bet up to $100 and to get that Herbert free prop, he just has to throw for 1 yard. Click the link in the description and use the code SAL22. Okay, so I think Holland is an okay play, but maybe you want to go to the tight ends instead, who are a little bit cheaper and also seeing nice usage, starting with Tyler Higbee at $6,200. You see, Higbee last week actually saw a team high 5 targets. That's how bad it's gotten for the Rams right now. He's not playing with a great quarterback, led to just 2 catches for 14 yards. Now, he's out there often, playing 84% of the snaps last week, but he has 7 drops this season, the second most amongst any tight end. Sean McVay doesn't trust his dude on third downs or in the red zone. You can tell by the way they're designing plays. He's not a priority. So maybe you go to the other tight end in this game in Foster Moreau, who's on the field more than Higbee and seems to have more trust from his coaching staff. Moreau is slightly more expensive than Higbee at $6,600, but he's never leaving the field. I mean, let's look at his snaps this year. Early on in the year, yeah, it's because Darren Waller's playing. He's not playing any snaps. But once Darren Waller gets hurt, 96, 100%, 98, 95, 100%. This past week, he plays 90%. That seems low. Yeah, he came off for a couple snaps because he got injured. Now, your issue is he's never crossed 44 receiving yards in a game this year because Devontae Adams and Matt Collins are out there. They run the ball a lot. So Moreau is probably going to have to get there on a touchdown or bust. But so is Tyler Higbee. And the Raiders are projected for 6 more points in this game. So if I'm taking a dart on either of these tight ends, it'll be Foster Moreau. Now, the actual value that we talked about early on, those wide receivers in Brandon Powell and Keelan Cole, they seem interesting. But really, the guys who are going to look consistent are the kickers and defenses here. I prefer the kickers, leading with Daniel Carlson because he has a 25-point team total compared to Matt Gay, just 19 points. But also, the Rams will go for 4th downs more often, leaving field goal points on the board, whereas the Raiders are going to kick more field goals, helps Carlson even more. And then if we're choosing between the defenses here, I'll actually take the Rams, who are $1,800 cheaper than the Raiders, and I have the Raiders projected for just 1 more points than the Rams in the DFS blueprint, link down below on Patreon. So there's a better value here on the Rams for their cheap price tag if you're choosing a defense. Now, there are still some players we haven't talked about, and let's talk about them right now. There might be some diamonds in the rough here, and I'll call these guys the rest, or what's left. And let's start with a running back out of Las Vegas, and Amir Abdullah, the nearly 30-year-old back. Abdullah actually played the second most snaps last week. He played 12 snaps, 20% of the overall snaps ahead of Zamir White, and that's because he's the main passing down backup third down specialist. And according to PFF, you can see right here, he played every snap in the 2-minute drill, all 3 of them, and he played 8 out of the 9 third and longs ahead of Josh Jacobs. He's also averaging over 3 targets a game for the last 7 games, so that's good, but his team is a 6-point favorite in this one. Can we actually rely on that usage? Probably not. Okay, well, what about the other running back in this backfield who's only $1,200 in Zamir White? He seems to be the early down backup on 1st and 2nd downs behind Josh Jacobs. He's a 4th-round rookie who has fantastic size, fantastic speed, but the problem is he only has 12 carries on the year. Even when Jacobs is banged up like he was the last 2 weeks, he's still seeing all of the work. So the answer in this backfield is Josh Jacobs or nothing, but now let's talk about some more cheap wide receivers. Here's a dude in Austin Tremmel from the Rams who last week actually saw some usage. He played 10 snaps, he ran 8 routes, and he saw 2 targets. Now, these were his first routes and his first targets of the season, and let's not kid ourselves here. He was the wide receiver 5 on this team, and based on the way they use Tutu Atwell and Brandon Powell, it seems like he's the clear wide receiver 5. So it's tough to want to get to him even at his cheap price point compared to a guy like Keelan Cole, who played nearly 60% of the snaps last week. And then there's a backup tight end we could talk about in Bryson Hopkins. Now, Hopkins has been schemed into a couple of plays this season, but still just 5 total targets on the year, just about 30 routes run on the year. We can't be playing him over guys like Keelan Cole at the exact same price tag. And that's what we can say for the rest of these guys not named Keelan Cole at the $200 price tag. DJ Turner, well, he has 0 targets on 6 total routes this year. Okay, Sal, what about Jacob Hollister? When Darren Waller's been hurt, he has to be seeing more usage, right? No, if I told you Foster Moreau's never leaving the field, well, Jacob Hollister ran his first 3 routes of the season last week. Yeah, he's not all that appealing. And then the only other player that we haven't talked about who will probably see usage is the fullback Johnson from the Raiders. He'll probably play 40% of the snaps, but basically he has like 3 targets on the season. You're not going to get much there. So these are the players who look really good, some who don't. If you wanted to see the exact ownership, projections, rankings on all these dudes and every player for week 14, well, you can pick up the DFS blueprint. This is last week's, and this is just part of the wide receivers that are projected out, just one of the tools out of the 8 that are in the blueprint. The rest of the tools and offerings are listed right here, and you can get them all and join 1,000+ other people using the DFS blueprint to win more and stop losing with the link in the description below. Best of luck on this slate. Go win yourself some dollar rooskies, you beautiful people, and I'll see you all in the next one.